In this video, I'm going to be looking at the brand new Convoyer. This thing is releasing in the, well, it's basically the same event style as the Waffenträger. As you can see here, there are two tanks you can get by opening these boxes, and you get currency for them. And when you open these boxes, there is a tiny chance for these boxes to drop the Convoyer. So yeah, it's basically a very hard tank to actually be able to get. As you can see here, it's in this box with quite a low drop chance. Let's see what it actually is. 1.12 drop chance. So it's a higher drop chance than the rest of the tanks in the box, but still, getting one of these boxes is still going to cost a lot because you have to open a bunch of these other ones. So it's not an easy tank to get, and I wouldn't really expect getting that. So anyway, the Convoyer, what is this tank all about? It's basically a gravedigger, but up at tier 8. It has pretty similar style of gun, but quite different in terms of the mobility, and I guess armor is pretty similar as well. But overall, the Convoyer's gun is just a lot more reliable than the one on the gravedigger, and it makes it a lot more, well, enjoyable to actually use and a lot more effective in battle. So let's actually just look at this tank's stats. There isn't yet a review on my site. I'll try to get it up soon, but I was a bit busy, so I didn't manage to finish it in time. But here you can see the armor of the Convoyer. It's pretty reliable for a heavy tank, as you would expect, because it's also pretty slow. Its lower plate is the main weak point. It's only 160, which means you can't really bounce tier 8 levels of penetration, even when angling. But if you face like a tier 7 tank or something, such as this IS-2 shielded, which I have here, if you face a tier 7, you still have pretty decent chance to bounce off the lower plate if you are angling pretty well. And even if they have, well, higher penetration, like 184, you can still just angle back and forth, and your lower plate will be pretty reliable. The thing is, you just can't do it against premium ammo or against tier 8 to 9 tanks, because the lower plate is just too weak. But overall, pretty good armor profile. You can see the upper plate is extremely strong at almost 400mm. The turret front is also really strong, 270 to 290mm, and even when you load premium ammo, it doesn't change too much on the front of the turret. One thing you do have to note though is that the turret side is very strong, 192mm thick. So again, let's use this tier 7 heavy tank as an example. Look at the side of the turret. It is completely red. You can't penetrate that. And if you load gold, yeah, now you can go through, but still, it's so strong for the side of the turret, which means that even if you're turning the turret to shoot a different enemy, you still have a pretty good chance to bounce off its side. And then, of course, it does have a small weak point on the top of the turret, which is around 150mm thick. But, it's not a big weak point. At least it's there, but for the most part, it is pretty small, and it's not visible when using gun depression. You can ignore these numbers because I just copy pasted from a different thing, and I haven't yet adjusted it for this. But you can see the turret front very strong when using gun depression. But overall, very reliable armor for the Convoyer. I forgot to mention its sides are actually also very strong. 109mm on the hull side, which for a tier 8 tank is very reliable. On top of this, it has between 7 and 20mm of spaced armor on, well, you can see there. It doesn't cover much of the side, but it does help, and you'll see it in the gameplay a bit. It can stop some heat shells. But yeah, overall, a reliable armor profile for this super heavy tank. It is an 80-ton tank, so pretty decent armor. Next, the gun. This is the special thing on the tank. It has AP, APCR, HE. Oh yeah, it is an 80mm gun, so the caliber is pretty low, but the damage is also pretty low, so it kind of makes sense. Penetration, very normal for a tier 8 heavy tank. Not bad, not anything amazing. Alpha damage is very low, 120 on standard ammo, and 90 on premium, 160 on HE. Very, very low alpha damage, but the reason for this is it has 6 shells in the magazine, which means its total damage is 720 if you manage to shoot them all into the same enemy. and the intro clip is 0.5 seconds, which means you just unload that 720 damage super fast. In fact, the Convoyer is one of the highest, well, quickest damage unloading tier 8 tanks, because if you compare this to other tanks with very high alpha damage and short intro clips, such as like the G-Saw or the T-77, this is kind of along those lines, because if you put all the intro clip together, it's 2.5 seconds to unload the whole magazine. If this tank was doing this burst damage in 2 shells, then its intro clip would be 1.8 with 360 alpha. Just as a comparison, that's pretty close to what the G-Saw does, and that is a TD, so this thing does unload tons of damage really quick. So in total, 720 burst damage, 2.5 seconds to do that 720, giving it 2,686 DPM, which is very high for tier 8 in general, but let alone for an autoloader. For an autoloader, that is insane DPM. So yeah, really good DPM for this tank, really good burst damage for this tank. But the aim time is not so good, 3.9, 4.2 seconds. You would expect it to be a lot better for such low alpha, but unfortunately it's not. 2.7 seconds base aim time, that's also quite bad for tanks in general, let alone one with such low alpha. Dispersion though, that is very good, 0.326. Yeah, very nice dispersion for a heavy tank, and it's got pretty good on-move dispersion. One thing I need to mention is the after-shot dispersion, that is 2.0, which is very good for an autoloader, and it matters a lot because this tank doesn't have time to aim in after each shot, so you kind of have to rely on that, well, the dispersion after shot to actually keep you accurate each time you shoot. The shell velocities are pretty decent, nothing too special, but nothing bad either, and gun depression is -7 degrees around the whole tank, which is so nice. 7 degrees is a huge upgrade over the Gravedigger, and if you guys have played Gravedigger before, you'll know having only 5 degrees of gun depression on this massive tank is just such a limitation. It is so annoying to only have 5 degrees. So the fact that the Convoyer is, for 1, smaller, 2, having 2 degrees more gun depression, it's just so much more usable in terms of the positions you can take. So yeah, 7 gun depression, very, very nice. Overall, a pretty good gun. In fact, a very good gun, considering all stats are decent to very good, except for the aim time. You can actually be very effective with this gun, and you'll see that in the gameplay. It just outputs damage so quickly. Next, mobility. This tank is pretty slow, as I mentioned already, 32 kilometers top speed, 11 in reverse, which is pretty bad, 12.5 horsepower per ton, which is very slow for a heavy tank, and this tank does weigh 80 tons. So, you know, in special fun modes, if you can get some ability or, you know, just get up to speed in regular mode, you might be able to ram some enemies and do some decent damage. The acceleration rate is 12.5 horsepower per ton on hard terrain. This traverse speed is wrong. The traverse speed of this tank is 37.4 degrees, which is actually very good for a super heavy tank, and it's more than you would expect. However, it is worth noting this tank has horrible terrain resistances, which means that acceleration rate of 12.5 drops down to 8 on medium terrain, and the traverse speed of 37.5 drops down to 25 on medium terrain, which is a massive 12 degree per second traverse speed difference. So you really want to try stay on hard terrain as much as possible, because going to medium terrain just ruins your mobility. It's not like you had that much to begin with in the first place. Next, the consumables. I would go with double repair kit because it's a heavy tank, you kind of need those repairs, and also the engine power boost, just because this tank, it is very slow, especially on medium terrain, and if you want to reach positions or relocate, I think this is actually quite an important one to have on the tank. Next, provisions. This tank just has the normal provision set, so I would just run double food and then 1 fuel. The fuel is absolutely mandatory on this tank because it is just such a slow vehicle. It really struggles with its mobility, and you'll see that in the gameplay with how it moves. Now, equipment. I would go with calibrated shells because this tank, with how it's balanced, really relies on just RNG to get its shots out and actually deal damage. So calibrated shells is helpful because you don't have time to fully aim in after each shot and make sure each one's accurate, so you kind of want to have the maximum possible penetration you can, just to be able to give yourself the best chance of getting damage if you don't have the time to fully aim in. And you'll see it in a moment in the gameplay what I mean about this. And while we're on this topic, same thing for refined gun. You don't have the time to fully aim in, so you kind of rely on just the pure dispersion to actually make sure those shots hit. You're kind of doing a spray and pray, just shooting the button and then hoping your shots go where you are aiming them. You can't really rely on the aim time on this tank just because the intro clip is so short. Next, defense system and optics. As per normal, this tank does have very bad view range for a heavy tank for some reason, so that is something to note. Next, I would not recommend engine accelerator, to be honest. This tank is very slow, but its top speed, you aren't exactly going to be going anywhere with that, as it's only 32. I think the traverse speed is more important on this tank because it is just so slow at turning on medium terrain, and it is pretty helpful to be able to actually angle your armor towards the enemies and to turn your turret to get the gun shooting on the enemies. Hence why I would go with that better traverse speed. Next, improved assembly. Enhanced armor doesn't really do anything on the Convoyer. Its turret front is already strong enough to bounce nearly all tier 8 tanks. Its hull front is strong enough to bounce all tier 9 and even tier 10 tanks, and the lower plate is too weak to really even be angled against tier 8 tanks. So there's not really too much point in using enhanced armor. I would rather go with that extra HP, as this tank does have a very nice 1900 base hit points, which is very good for a tier 8 heavy tank. Next, gun lane drive. This tank doesn't have very good aim time, so I would recommend to do this. Yes, you could say, oh well, it doesn't have good aim time and you're kind of relying on RNG anyway, you may as well use supercharger. That could be a valid argument, but this is kind of a more close range type brawler tank. You don't really need shell velocity in the majority of situations, and even if you did, remember, your aim time's so bad, it's not super likely you're going to hit those shots at very long range anyway, especially with, well, such low alpha. It's not really too worth doing, in my opinion. So I would recommend going with the gun lane drive, just to improve that aim time. Like I said already, don't use vertical stabilizer, use refined gun, just because of how this thing's gun has been balanced. And it already does have very good stabilization stats and after-shot dispersion. And then finally, I would go with toolbox and consumable delivery system. So there are two replays I have in this tank which I want to show. This first one is going to be on Vineyards. It is a full tier 8 game, so there's no low tier tanks, no higher tier tanks to shoot. Kind of perfect for showing how this tank plays, because I would say it plays roughly the same whether facing tier 7 or tier 9 enemies. It still does a massive burst whether you're facing either of those tiers, but of course against tier 7s your armor on the lower plate will be a bit more reliable. You can probably play a bit more aggressive because of this tank's insane DPM. But yeah, you can see this thing, you know, that mobility, you're not getting anywhere too quickly really, and I am on hard terrain, so I have the best possible mobility already, and you can just see how slow it is. Sure, I do have improved control, so my acceleration isn't the best, but even so, you know, this is hard terrain. It has much more mobility on hard terrain. You can see here what I mean about the kind of spray and pray, hope you hit. Sure, that wasn't the best situation to be doing that, but I still managed to get 2 shots out of it. But here I make a mistake. I over-angle and I take 2 shots from the Jagdtiger and the AC. So big mistake on my part, I shouldn't have over-angled like that. But now you can see, in a proper side scrape I can actually get the bounces, as this thing doesn't have any side weak points. And its turret is so narrow that you kind of automatically hide the cupola by side scraping. You can just see this thing's damage output. It does damage so fast, 720 damage in 2.5 seconds. and then in 13 seconds it's reloaded again. Its DPM is so high for a tier 8 tank. And then the nice thing is you have 6 shells, right? Sure, 120 damage isn't high, but 6 shells is still pretty significant. Finished off the Jagdtiger, and now I did almost 400 damage in that AC. And you'll see how I'm kind of in a 1v3 situation. Sure, not all 3 of the enemy tanks were actually going for me at the same time, but that just plays into this tank's strength really well. It gives you the time you need to reload, to actually go out and put out that damage. You can see there how that Progetto just went from a very healthy amount of HP down to just 300, just like that. And of course, the thing having good armor and good HP means I have enough HP to actually come around this corner, just tank a shot if needed, and then kill the AC. Fortunately, it wasn't needed, so I survived with 390 hit points, which will help me take out that Progetto. But yeah, like, just look at that. It deals damage so fast, and then it reloads so fast. Unfortunately, all 3 of those miss, so not the best there. But you can see how the biter is bouncing off the space armor on the side of the tank. Actually, let me just pause the replay and show that. You can see all those 3 shots from the biter actually did bounce off the space armor there. So there is actually some use to that. Especially against lower penetration tanks and at longer range, it does help. But that is it for this game. I don't manage to get more HP, but more damage, but you can see this tank's mobility, right? This is medium terrain, so my mobility on this terrain is much worse than when it was in the town, and you can just see how slow it is. Along that flat bit, I wasn't even getting up to 30, and now I'm having to go up a hill. It's just so slow. 14, 13, 12 kilometers per hour getting up this hill. Absolutely not a mobile vehicle. But you know, this thing makes up for it with that insane firepower, right? You look at the stats on this gun and you would think, you know, it is so much firepower. 2,680 DPM is tons for tier 8, especially on a heavy tank, especially on an autoloader, so yeah. And having those 6 shells, again, that is just makes it pretty flexible in some ways. Sure, it's not as nice for burst damage as a 2-shot autoloader, but it does still give it quite a few opportunities to get out damage. And in some situations you would potentially get more than a 2-shot autoloader just because you have more chances to actually hit and penetrate. So unfortunately the replay did crash there. It's kind of annoying, but oh well. 3,800 damage, an ace, and blocking 2,330 damage. Despite that kind of bad side scrape at the beginning there, I was still able to utilize this tank's side armor for the most part against the AC and the Jagdtiger to try bounce that 2,300 damage. So it is quite nice in those situations where you can actually side scrape. 130,000 credits, but that is without any credit booster, and that's thanks to that ace. So the next replay is going to be on Black Goldfield. Again, a full tier 8 battle, which is kind of interesting, and there are no TDs on our team, only one on the enemy team. Mainly just heavy tanks and medium tanks. But one thing you'll notice is how slow this vehicle is. Any enemy is just faster than me, every single one. Tiger 2, IS-3, KV-5, Prowler, Panther 2, ISU, you know, all just quicker tanks. And on a map like this where you're trying to get across the open to actually reach the heavy flank, kind of an important thing. Well, this and Naval Frontier, for example. But I do stop to take a shot at this KV-5, so yeah, it's my own fault that I don't make it to the front of the flank, to be honest. And I do take a shot from a sniping Tiger 2 at the back of the map. But you can see there with this gun, right, KV-5 does have a very strong armor profile, so I only hit one of those shots, which is kind of unfortunate. And you can see I did try to actually aim in each shot, taking a bit of time, longer than the intraclip, but, you know, may as well just spam them out and go back to reloading. And you'll see here, I've already bounced 2,300 damage, one from a side scrape, and then the Tiger 2 tracks me, which causes the ISU to miss and shoot under my tank, which is kind of funny. But here you can see against this IS-3 what I mean with that, you know, spray and pray, right? I'm just shooting, I'm not letting the gun aim, I'm just hoping some shots hit. And out of that, I still got 380 damage, which is pretty nice, right? That is just letting the RNG do its thing. You have so many shells, you know, surely some of them are bound to hit. And then you can just see here, against the KV-5, just does such fast damage. But yeah, this tank, as long as you aren't having to move anywhere too quickly, you can just sit there in a side-scraping position. It does very, very well, because, you know, the enemies have to face you, they have to deal with you, and you can just sit there farming them with your insane DPM. As long as they aren't running away, and, you know, you're having to chase after them, then you'll do fine in this tank. Because the one downside I would say about this tank is definitely its mobility. The gun is great, I mean, you can see it. It's doing damage so fast, it's relatively accurate even if its aim time is bad. The only thing is, it's really slow, it's not getting anywhere quickly, and it kind of struggles to, well, keep up in faster battles. I would say this is one of those faster battles. I got kind of lucky that, you know, it happened on this flank, and it wasn't the medium flank where all the action was happening. But yeah, you can just see, this thing just pelts out damage so quickly. This one not as impressive as the last one, 2,600 damage, but this one kind of does show the reliability of the armor, how you can side scrape, how you can bounce shots, and still the gun working decently well. But yeah, 3.7k block damage almost, with 2,600 damage dealt. 19,000 credits made. I don't think this tank actually makes a lot of credits, because that was also without any credit booster on, and that was just a second class, so kind of interesting, that, but oh well. This tank, I would definitely say it's one which you get for the gameplay, not so much something you want for grinding credits or anything like that. But yeah, conclusion on the Convoyer. Well, one, it's very expensive. You probably will not be getting this tank, so I wouldn't say it's worth trying to get at the moment. It's unfortunate because this is a really cool, really fun tank. I know when the Gravedigger first released, and for a few years after the Gravedigger released, this thing was played a lot. It doesn't really deal tons of damage, because its gun just isn't as effective as the Convoyer tier for tier, but people played this tank a lot just because it's very unique in its gun, and that style of gun is just so fun to play, it's so fun to shoot. So, you know, the Gravedigger being pretty similar to this, I could see the Convoyer being quite a popular tank, which is played by a lot of players just because, well, it's very fun to play. On top of that, it's a good tank. So, kind of unfortunate that this tank isn't actually obtainable that easily, because I personally would have liked to have this tank on my main account, but I can't because of how it's being released, and I'm sure a lot of other players would too, just because it's one of those fun, kind of interesting tanks, kind of like the FVE Defender, or the ATAC with the burst type of gun, which is just so different to other tanks. And yeah, it is really just fun to play. So yeah, unfortunate. I do hope Wargaming does bring this back in the future and it doesn't remain an exclusive tank like the Waffenträger, because that would genuinely be so annoying. But overall, Convoyer, it is actually a very good tank. Yeah, it's slow, sure, but it does have reliable armor for that slow mobility, and it makes up for that slow mobility by having a really dangerous gun, really potent in terms of its damage output, and it outputs that damage so fast. I mean, I showed it in the gameplay, right? 13-second reload, and then it does 720 damage, just that fast, and then it's back reloaded again after a very short, you know, magazine reload of 13 seconds. Just having such high DPM on a tier 8 tank is really impressive, and especially for a heavy tank autoloader, it just feels like this tank's shooting all the time. So, a good tank, definitely. Would I say it's OP or broken? Honestly, I don't think so. I think it has enough weak points in its armor to be balanced in terms of its armor, and I think that the mobility is just bad enough to balance out this gun. I wouldn't say it's average, I would say this thing's definitely better than a lot of tier 8 tanks. However, I wouldn't call it OP or, broken. I would say it's a bit too strong, sure, but generally I think it is just that, a bit too strong. But yeah, that is it for the Convoyer. Really hope they do bring this tank back. It is really fun to play, and I wish all of you out there who like the Gravedigger would be able to also experience this tank, as that difference in intraclip of, well, the Gravedigger has 0.67 seconds intraclip, the Convoyer has 0.50 seconds intraclip. That difference of 0.17 does actually make quite a lot of difference when you shoot this fast, when you have this many shells in the magazine. So, I hope this tank does come back, but unfortunately, this is what we have for the moment. So yeah, that's it though. Thanks all for watching.